This is the Instant Speed Podcast, episode number 57. Our guest today is fellow co-caster and card designer, Bryan Gottlieb. Bryan, no middle name Gottlieb. Yeah, we'll get him someday. Nonetheless, it is nice to be home, but boy, oh boy, what a weekend did we have at the World Championships of Flesh and Blood that went down in San Jose, California. We're going to talk about that, but first, I want to let you know that this episode of Instant Speed is brought to you by FAB Cards. You see this hat? This is my new favorite hat. Job from FAB Cards came and brought me this, and I am elated because it is the perfect fit, the perfect style, the greatest color scheme. I am so overjoyed that I have this hat. But FAB Cards, it's where fantasy and reality meet. You can go to kfabcards.com to place your order for all of your Flesh and Blood needs. Dynasty's out. Go get a case, go get a box, go get some singles. Go to kfabcards.com. But not just for Flesh and Blood. You like Magic? You like Pokemon? They got you covered. I'm telling you, support those who support the community. FAB Cards, www.kayfabecards.com. Be who you want to be at FAB Cards. All right, let's get to the facts. There's a lot to dig through. The world champion is Michael Hamilton of the USA. Was there any doubt Michael Hamilton taking out Chris Ayali in a USA showdown? It was Icelander versus Breyer, and ultimately Michael Hamilton reminded the world that the debate is over. He is just hands down the best player in the world. The calling was won by Chandler Toe on Reinar. Yes, Reinar getting his licks in on beating up Bravo in the finals, whereas the battle hardened was won by Peter Krempek on Prism, and that was awesome to see, as well as Prism's getting her time to shine once again, just coming out of living legend status to go ahead and, tickle Blitz a little bit in the best way possible. Not to be outdone, I want to shed some light on our good friend Dagan White. Dagan White is somebody who is always out there on top of the Swiss rounds leaderboard after day one, and unfortunately tends to bubble out. And here he was bubbling out again, but took down the developer challenge, as it were, as the ranked 9 through 16 of Worlds got to play against the developers at LSS for the first ever cold foil Royal Hat. I forgot the name of it, but it's the Royal Hat, and Dagan White won it, as he most definitely should. Great person. The first gold foil Royal headpiece belongs to Dagan White, so congratulations to you, Dagan. Moving on. In case you haven't seen it already, the Goliath Gauntlet was settled a couple weeks ago, or probably about 10 or so days ago. Close your ears if you don't want to know who won, but here it comes. It was won by Caleb Van Patten, aka Majin Bay, defeating DM Armada, taking home the wonderful foiled out mat, and the special prize as well of a gold foil Goliath Gauntlet card from PCG Grading and LSS. Caleb Van Patten just proving once again why he is just an awesome dude at everything he does. Finally, the banned and restriction announcements have come out, and the most important part of this is all the Wizard mains reunite, as the Stormstriders are out of the closet and back on your feet for Blitz. No changes in CC. Didn't suspect there would be, but there's a whole myriad of changes for Blitz that are basically all sewn together by the fact that Stormstriders are once again legal, friends. So congratulations to all my Wizard bros. Bust out them Metacarpus nudes and get it done. All right, that's it. That's all. Bryan Gottlieb's on the show today. We talk about the World Championships. We talk about the challenging aspects of casting for 3 straight days, as well as his influence on Dynasty and card design. We answer your questions. It is a phenomenal episode of ISP. This is the Instant Speed Podcast, and we're welcoming back an old favorite, nestled so snugly in his mahogany manor. I don't know what else to call it, but it looks so comfy. I've got you on this screen, so if I'm looking elsewhere, it's because there's so much of you that is just so organic. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's mahogany. I don't know what my house is actually made out of. It is a lot of logs. A lot of sizable logs. In this room we're currently in, these are where I keep some of my smaller logs. Although if you can, I don't think you can see the ceiling. There are giant logs up above my head that kind of like support the whole upstairs. Someday we'll do a video tour, and I'll show you all of my logs, Flake. I'm sure you can't wait.
Yeah, FAB Cribs is going to be actually, after this show, the stack, salty logs, we're doing FAB Cribs. That's the next move.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good next move.
I think so. But you're welcome back, my co-caster. But more importantly, you are now a part of the design crew when it comes to actually creating cards and such. And Dynasty has your fingerprints a little bit on it. Whereas I think you mentioned to me that the next set, that's where it gets really greasy for Bryan Gottlieb. But for now, we're going to focus on a few things. And I want to kick this off by saying, first of all, welcome. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
You're a good dude, and I appreciate you very much. But World Championships just wrapped up. We're kind of still coming off of that high. I was still on the plane, actually, and just sort of taking it in and continuously, reliving moments and this and that. There was a lot of, remember when this and remember when that, just playing over in my head. But now there's just nothing around the corner for a while, and it must hit differently when you go home after a big event. And it's not like, well, see you at Pro Tour Lille or see you at Nats or whatever. Like, there's nothing going on now.
Yeah, I have a feeling before too long we'll get our next looks at what's coming for OP. And this is actually no inside information. That's not something I, really get involved in. But it just stands to reason that we'll get some information pretty soon around the corner. And hopefully you and I will be back in the booth broadcasting it. I will say that, like, this event felt different. It really did. Like, I've done a lot of shows now, like so many shows. Something about the vibe of this one was just like, I just go back to that moment where we're calling the finals, and I've never seen the crowds. Like, our booth was just swarmed, like just stacks of people, and as many people, as many friends and like family that could come in the booth with us and like hang out. People were just piled up, sitting on the floor, leaning on each other to get a look, to say nothing of just like down by the feature match area, the people piled multiple rows deep. And yeah, man, I mean, like, it's hard for me to remember so much positivity coming out of an event. Like, not to say there weren't hiccups along the way, but overall, just like the vibe in that room was immaculate. Like, people were stoked.
That's the good way to put it. Again, like you mentioned, the hiccups. We'd be stupid not to mention things that, like, it wasn't obviously not in any way, shape, or form the ideal venue or the ideal circumstances for a lot of things. And I don't want to harp on negatives here, but again, like, the bathrooms were in a separate building or trailer outside of the venue, and it wasn't like the most pristine or beautiful venue. It was a kind of a big kind of add-on to the convention center.
Functional. But I would describe it as functional at best.
Right. Like, we needed to clear out of there because they were going to put a 747 in there overnight or something like that. Like, that's kind of the vibe. But ultimately, that wasn't what we were there for. We were there to play the game. And like you mentioned, the caster booth was kind of like in an open area, which it hasn't been for many of the events that we've done. You're kind of amidst the crowd, and we didn't even have a backdrop for the first day, I believe. It only came in midway or towards the end of the day one, where you see everything going on behind you. It had that like Good Morning America vibe, where I was literally just waiting for somebody to do something absolutely stupid behind us. But thank God that was sort of sorted out. But in that final, it was, I think it was yourself and Tannen calling the final. I was doing the cards to put up onto the overlay. And then next to me was like Matt Rogers, and next to him was, I don't know if it was Hayden or if it was Doa or whoever it was. But behind us, behind that little kind of velvet curtain to keep us away from the normies, there was this way deep, just people leaning over, whispering moves and this and that. And like you said, the feature area was 3 or 4 people deep looking over each other to get a glimpse of it. It was certainly something absolutely unique and special. And I can't speak enough about how, in the grand scheme of things, I think people are going to remember the gameplay and the camaraderie and the joy of that event over things like, hey, like I took me 45 minutes to get a piece of vegan pizza.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Flake. And, that's not to wipe hands of anything that went wrong. You got to put on great events. And I do think this was a great event, but you also want to get all those little details right. And I am confident, knowing all my friends at LSS, they will continue to work on it. And all those things that didn't go ideally, I don't think anyone was blind to them. Everyone was very much aware and wanted them to be better, and I think they will be in the future. You know, Doa and I, we swapped a bunch of stories about like the first League of Legends World Championships, which was essentially just like in a basement, and you can go back and look at pictures of it. And I hope we followed the same arc with Flesh and Blood. Not to say anything was of like that quality. It certainly was a much better event than that. And you know, it was on par with like GPs I had been to in the past. Magic GPs was about where I'd put the level of like accommodations. But I have a feeling that as we go through the years and we sort this all out, it'll just get grander and grander and grander. Because, you know, James has a flair for these type of things. Like, you know, all that flag procession stuff and like all the really fun little details that made the event special. So many of those are his baby. Like he feels so strongly about making the event stand out. And it did. I think all of those things really did deliver, you know, the flag procession to start things off. Even the little touches like the flags just being removed from the World Championship area as, you know, their bearers were removed from top 8 contention. I thought that stuff was really cool and did make it feel special and exciting.
Yeah, little extra touches were always great. The flag procession was a nice touch, definitely. Seeing somebody, you know, like I felt pride when I saw Tarek. You know, Tarek's a friend of mine, but Tarek's also somebody who I'm proud to say was representing Canada, walking it down the line there.
Former U.S. national champion Tarek Patel. Yep,
that's correct.
Good
yes,
representative of Canada.
The absolute goat of doubling down on dual citizenship. Tarek Patel comes in, cashes his paychecks in the U.S., but helps us out up here up north, which is fantastic. The whole thing was awesome, and ultimately it comes down to Michael Hamilton. Mr. Consistency. I don't know, you know, we always talk about, I love nicknames for people. I love giving them nicknames, especially when they stick, which was funny because I opened the broadcast with Brendan Patrick and I called him Beeps, like BP, you know, and he afterwards, before we go into the second segment, wherever he's like, hey man, don't call me Beeps. I really don't want that to stick. You got it.
Way to get out in front of it, Brendan. Good idea.
No, smart move. Absolutely smart move. Because nobody wants to go, you know, a year from now and somebody's nickname is like Waffle Stomper or something. Because it's just like randomly.
It can spiral quickly.
Oh, for sure. Wildfire. And you got to get in front of it. But Michael Hamilton now winning world championships. The debate is over. I'm not trying to open this up to discussion, Brian. I think that we both know that Michael Hamilton is undoubtedly the best player of Flesh and Blood in the world, hands down.
If you don't like that, come take the title from him. I mean, he's got the world championship in his hands, along with many other accomplishments. So I agree, Flake. People, if they want to make a case for themselves, I will support them in doing so. But you got to put out the results first before you're going to take that title away.
Well, it's one of the best things I heard. I forgive me if I, because I do not recall who this comes from. I'm not taking credit for this, but if you know who said this, please comment in the video or whatnot. But somebody said we need to start giving Michael Hamilton living legend points and retiring him because it's unfair for most people who come into the tournament and just have to face this absolute dynamo who is leagues ahead of everybody else, I feel. And you know, there we were. We had the discussion about who the best is in the world is. We had an entire episode devoted to this, and there was a lot of people saying, dude, you just completely iced out Poland, and come on, like, give it a rest. And here I am, all on my Canadian high horse, and my mother was born in Poland, so I've got that in my back pocket. I brought both little mini flags.
From Poland, so I'm with you.
Yeah, completely dunked on. Like, no offense to Poland and Canada, but you guys did not show up. Like, there was a great day one, and day two was just falling off a cliff here.
Yeah, I think one Polish player in the top 16, I believe, and 0 Canadian players in the top 16. So definitely below their very, very high standards for those two regions.
Yeah, I was definitely put in my place on that one, and rightfully so. Again, I want the best players in the world to win, but what attributed do you think? Like, do you think that people may have just slept on Blitz and said that, well, you know, it's a high variance format anyway, so it's wrong for me to devote too much time to prep there?
I really don't think so, because the people who did well in that format, they kind of broke it. Like, a lot of players playing Prism. And as we move through, you know, we had this progression on day 2 where we went and we were scouting the Blitz rounds when they began, and we went to the top tables. And at this point, the people at the top tables, Blitz had no determination in that. It's just they did well in draft, they did well in constructed, and they ended up at these top tables. And we went around and we looked, and it was just wall to wall Icelander Oldham matchups, wall to wall, like seriously, just all the top 2 tables. And then we played the Blitz rounds, and those prisms started filtering up over and over and over, along with some chains. Like I don't want to discount chain, of course. Someone like Dan Catton played chain to a top 8 berth, so that was present as well. But what you really felt was Prism starting to distance itself and proving to be really the best metagame call you could have made into that Blitz format. So the players who found that, who did the work there, were rewarded for it. I think, some players played it maybe a little safe. I think Oldham ultimately proved to be like a safe option that really wasn't all that good. It didn't really have strengths against anyone. And Icelander was just kind of, Icelander is what Icelander is. Very powerful, very consistent hero. I think that was a fine choice. But to me, Prism was really the standout deck choice of the Blitz rounds.
It kind of caught me off guard as well, because in my mind, I'm thinking, how is Prism going to survive an aggressive meta? Usually Prism, the first 20 points of Prism's life are sacrificed to board development. And there it is, just playing and toying with so many different heroes. And against Chain, what I was told was Chain just absolutely abuses Prism. Like, it's not even a close game. But meanwhile, the first Blitz match that we had was Prism versus Chain, and Chain had absolutely nothing to offer in that regard. A very timely Arclight Sentinel stuffing, a sack full of blood debt that you're on the hook for. It's great to see that it's not just about the high roll. Now, we did get to see, don't get me wrong, when I was approaching this and having a lot of the conversations I was having, because there was still a lot of people who just wanted to give no dap to Blitz at all. And I said, well, I can see how it can go, because the worst thing that can happen is like the first game is an absolute blowout. It ends in a turn and there's no game to be played. But we didn't see that until, I guess, Haydendale got essentially Reinhardt to pieces. Is that still a concern, you think, that these things happen, or are they so rare that even if you do see it on camera, it might make for bad optics on the actual format itself, but ultimately it's just not frequent enough to be a concern?
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. I think it was, on the whole, the Blitz matchups we had on stream were excellent games of flesh and blood, top to bottom, except for one. And that was the match that Hayden played where Reinhardt high rolled. And, one of the arguments that a bunch of players made to me was, well, Blitz can't be a very good format because, you just show up with Reinhardt and turn 0 someone. But nobody did that. Nobody was willing to do. If you can't do that consistently, yes, there are these very, very high variance decks that you could go ahead and roll the dice with, but you are in fact rolling the dice literally and figuratively. And I think in the moment where you make this really bold choice and you're kind of willing to leave a little bit more to fate, to take nothing away from a good Reinhardt player, because it is easy to play those games where you high roll and you do 12 unpreventable damage on turn 1. Sure, those games are easy, but that's not where your tournament bread and butter is made. You have to win close games. You have to win games in all types of scenarios. So even if you do occasionally get rewarded with those raffle stomp steamroll games, that's fine. There's still a bunch of work to be done on the back end. But I think when that game ultimately did show up on camera, it was heartbreaking for Hayden, but it was still an exciting moment for the camera. It was like a really, really explosive game. And I honestly was quite pleased with the state of Blitz at Worlds.
Well, Reinhardt is something that Haydendale's very happy to play all the time, and you could see the big smile on his face when it happened, because I think that's one of the dreams that he may have had when he was selecting his Blitz deck, was like, what if I was able to do this in a pivotal moment? And there he was on the receiving end. I think you're right about it, because like heroes like Starvo, let's say, a lot of players were kind of on the fence with it, because they said, well, you're getting a high octane offense if you can piece together these 3 unique variables to turn on the ability. But it's not just about that. It's more so it's about not classes or talent card that you're holding in hand. It's specific, very unique cards. And would you play Reinhardt if it was a 25% chance to steamroll on turn 1? I would do that in a heartbeat. I think that the power level and the payoff there is huge. But it's not. It's like a 2% or a 1% chance to have that kind of massive impact. And ultimately, there's a reason why Reinhardt wasn't as prevalent or powerful in the format, and it's because of that. And one person managed to perhaps get that to go and did it in a very pivotal moment against a very well-rounded and good player that I suppose wished it didn't happen, but there he was starting the game at 12 life. But Icelander is the other piece of Worlds that I want to touch upon here. Icelander as a tier 1 hero. There's some pros, there's some cons to this, and my evaluation of Icelander as a tier 1 hero revolves around the fact that anybody can relatively pick up a hero, let's say like Rhinar or, Katsu, Phi, and with a little bit of finesse and a little bit of time can essentially maximize or come close to squeezing out the full potential out of that hero. I feel like Icelander is not that. It's not a matter of peeling a deck off the internet and putting in, 10 games with it to understand how it goes and making it happen. Is Icelander as a tier 1 hero a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a fantastic thing. I think games against Icelander are interesting. They're longer. The hero is extremely powerful, but there's this really interesting thing, and this kind of extends out of the Blitz format a little bit and into Icelander in Classic Constructed, which I also think is worth talking about. But Icelander shows up at these big events, things like the Battle Hardened out in Denver, things like Worlds, wins or does extremely well in them. And then there's the event the next day, and Icelander disappears. It absolutely falls off the face of the map. We saw this happen in Denver. We saw this happen with the calling, which was won by Rhinar. And I think there's a good argument to be made that these callings that accompany things like Pro Tours, like the World Championships, are the hardest callings. That is where all the players from around the world are gathered with their absolute best. And just because you didn't make day 2 at Worlds doesn't mean you aren't a fantastic flesh and blood player. So very, very tough fields. And we saw a Rhinar versus Bravo finals in that end showdown. And I think it just points to the fact that Icelander is extremely hard to play. There are counters to Icelander. And again, we can go back to the Blitz format for this and point to something like Prism, which just absolutely ate up Icelanders throughout those Swiss rounds. So I do think it is a really, really good hero to have atop your metagame, way better than something like Starvo or a very linear Phi deck where a lot of the agency may be taken away from you when it really high rolls. Icelander has to play a long, consistent game and rarely spikes in that fashion. Certainly there are better draws than others, but it just doesn't have those to the moon spikes that we see out of some of the other top metagame decks.
Before we move on to just the casting booth and all the shenanigans that went back there, one player that I want to throw some love to because I've embarrassed myself in front of them but in the past is Dan Rutkowski, who, again, just cruised through Swiss, sliced through it like a hot knife through butter, not worried about it, and came up a little bit short. I believe he fell in the semifinals. Dan Rutkowski is somebody, and if for those out there who don't know the story of how I embarrassed myself in front of Dan Rutkowski, essentially it was the last day, the top 8 Sunday of Worlds, I saw US Nats. I walk into the venue, I see Brody Spurlock, who I'm a massive fan of, eating his ham sandwich like a good boy, getting ready to rock and roll and just, crush face. And I see him and he's next to 1 or 2 other people. His first match is against Dan Rutkowski, if I'm not mistaken. I think he played Dan in the quarters. And I go up to Brody and I give Brody a big hug. I say, Brody, go out there and crush that fool. Like, just make it happen, buddy. And I turn to the dude next to him and I say, hey, have a good day today. Hope you have a great day today. Not knowing that it was Dan Rutkowski. Completely anonymous. And I leave. And afterwards, I think I called his match and I tell Dan, and afterwards I get a message from Dan saying, hey, thanks for the kind words that you said about me during the broadcast and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, it was great. Hopefully I can meet you one day. And he's like, I did meet you. You were the guy who said, have a good day. And I felt like a complete doofus. But Dan Rutkowski is somebody who flies so low under the radar because he's not out there necessarily pumping out content, being on podcasts, looking for the limelight. He just goes
anymore, Flake.
No,
yeah, I don't think that's going to hold anymore. I think Dan has very much established himself as one of the biggest threats in the game.
Yeah, he just goes to work. And besides Dan Rutkowski, and if you want to add on to more Dan Rutkowski love, was there anyone out there who you think just cemented themselves as a name to watch that might be under the radar from this tournament?
I mean, you can literally point to the entire top eight. Of course, Chris Ayali, our other finalist, had a bunch of decent performances. Previously lost to Michael Hamilton in the finals of Battle Hardened Lille. So had been close to hoisting the trophy before. Someone that Doa had nothing but good things to say about. And you talk to people around his neck of the woods, that California flesh and blood scene, which is a very, very robust, very good and talented scene. A lot of them point to Chris Ayali as being the linchpin of that scene. So not only doing the work out there in the tournament arena, but also putting the community together. A huge breakout party for him. And I also like, it's hard because we do these events and you and I are from North America. We call more events in North America than anywhere else. And simply, we just know these players. We interact with them. We go to the same tournaments as them. So it's a little bit easier for us to know their backstory. We don't know as much about these players from the other region. And that's a shame because I want to know them. They're all incredible players, and we are starting to make some inroads. We're getting to know the folks on Team Poland. We're just barely starting to get to know the folks from the APAC region, which I'm very excited about. Tremendous players there. The Taiwan team is particularly of note. Taiwan Cakes, not so much of note, but Taiwan, just a great, awesome team. Go ahead, you may share your
I just want to
now.
shout out to Lionel, who was one of my favorite people I met that weekend, who, again, the Taiwan cake is not my favorite to ingest, but everything surrounding the acquisition of the Taiwan cake, I want to celebrate. And I told him, and I tweeted it out, you're one of my favorite people that I met all weekend, buddy. So thank you, Lionel.
Yeah, there's something about like Asian bakery goods that never quite hit with my Western palate, and I want them to, because I love all kinds of Asian food. And I remember when I was living in Seattle, a like Asian inspired bakery opened up in our neighborhood, and we were so excited. Everything looked so delicious, and I tried thing after thing after thing, and it's just like, I'm a big fat American. I want everything to be sugary and over the top and just ridiculous. And the Asian bakeries tend to be more like mellow and refined and just like a little bit less in your face. And I just can't get my taste buds accustomed to them. And I would say the same thing about Taiwan cake, but I still enjoyed the experience of trying it. It was quite novel. So
when I worked at the airline, we used to always, like, at the department that I work with, we had some friends of mine were like lived the life where they would show up to work on Fridays with a suitcase packed, not knowing where they were going, but they would check flights like at noon, and then they would peace out at like 3 p.m., hop a flight to wherever was available, because they flew for free. We got to fly for free as long as there were seats. And remember, once they went to Japan for like 2 days. And they came back with all kinds of candies. And they're like, Flake, we know you love Kit Kat. We know you love chocolate. I brought you back some. And I was like looking at this stuff, and there's like lotus flower flavored Kit Kats and stuff. I'm like, the fuck is this? Like, this is not my, I tried it, not my favorite. And you're completely right that sometimes if the palate for us might not just be refined. But have you ever seen the show An Idiot Abroad?
No, I have not.
It is a Ricky Gervais produced show where he sends his idiot friend unknowingly on these adventures, and Ricky Gervais purposely sends him to the most ridiculous areas and purposely screws it up for him because his friend is hilarious, because they have a documentary crew with him. And one of them was like, they send him to like Singapore or something, and he goes and they sends him to like this restaurant, but they're feeding him all kinds of weird stuff. And he, again, is this like very basic Brit who just wants, and it's just, that's how I feel, where people give me these delicious things. And I'm sure you're the same way. We're like, yeah, but a Twinkie is just as delicious, I would imagine,
I'm usually really good about this stuff. Like I do love foods from all over the world. And, I will try almost anything, within my dietary restrictions. And it's just something about Asian baked goods is not hitting for me. I'm sorry. I want to love them. Maybe someday.
Carl Pilkington, I think, is the name of the person that they sent. Anyways, for those who have seen it, comment on with your best Idiot Abroad episode, because they're all amazing. All right. Casting. The casting squad for this, in my opinion, there's so many out there. People like, I love working with someone like Stephen Cookus. DM Armada is one of my favorite people just in general. But I think we are spoiled with the talent that is available that continues to grow. And I want to open this up by just heaping a steaming pile of love and praise onto Brendan Patrick, who I had worked with a couple weeks prior in Columbus. And I was like, all right, like, there's something there. Like, he can absolutely work on this. And he came to play and was probably the best of us that weekend.
Yeah, I think Brendan adds something super unique to the broadcast, that ability to go just ultra in depth, to get down to the nitty gritty. And for a portion of the audience, that's what they're there for. They are there to learn, improve, get better, have themselves told why the best in the world are beating them. They want to go ahead and level up that next way. And Brendan delivers that in spades. He absolutely gets into that minutia that just watching him cover a game will make you a better flesh and blood player.
Like, what people need to understand, this was a conversation that we actually had privately yesterday, as it was Dave Rude brought it up in terms of what is the proper balance in terms of a broadcast. Who are you trying to appeal with? And really the answer is in the middle. Whereas somebody like myself who is doing play-by-play and describing on a macroscopic level what's going on, I also need to explain some of the most basic things, like why Blaze Headlong has go again. Because somebody tuning in sees 4, doesn't understand why there's go again. That's the basic level. Now, 90% of the people tuning in who have played Fi know why, but there's some who might not understand. Meanwhile, then there's Brendan Patrick, who's like, okay, this Blaze Headlong means XYZ, here's what he might be holding, here's what he's holding out for, here's why he might not, Art of War right now. I think that dichotomy is certainly finely tuned, and you play both sides of the coin. Actually, do you have a preference of what you prefer?
So much of my experience is in the play-by-play side of things, and I had just done it for so long. And I'm also just like generally kind of a control freak that I like pacing things. I like timing the intro, outro, setting up when we're going to whatever slides we're going to be reviewing. I do feel very comfortable in that regards. So if you were to just ask me blankly, which I prefer, it would be play-by-play. With our team, though, we have such a glut of talent in the play-by-play slot that I'm very comfortable making the transition over to the color side of things. And it's awesome to be able to work both sides. And I make sure I always get in a play-by-play round throughout coverage as well. I did a round with Brendan where I shifted in the play-by-play role. I did a round with Mr. Classic, Kieran, when I hopped into the play-by-play role. And just to keep my skills sharp and to kind of do that kind of show flow type stuff. And I always really enjoy it. But I'm just getting to the point where I'm very comfortable working either side. And I think the only downside of that is I am not as, when I shift from doing color into play-by-play, I'm not as descriptive as I should be in the play-by-play role. There's still like some of that breaking down the game that I've just sort of honed in on in that moment. And I'm not really shifting back as well to the presentation side. So at some point I would like to do a full event on the play-by-play side just to kind of get in that groove and get that rhythm going. But yeah, I'm pretty comfortable at both now.
The hours and the days, I think, are something that people are not necessarily in tune with or understand, where, we show up and you see us on screen and it's like, oh, these clowns work like an hour every 2 hours or every 3 hours. Well, that's kind of a little bit of a, that's just kind of shortchanging us a little bit here, because we're there at 8 in the morning, preparing, getting the notes, getting the pairings, learning stuff. There's always somebody on riding shotgun on the broadcast that's putting the cards up on the overlay, who's making sure that everybody's taken care of. And then there's one person who kind of floats around doing interviews or such, or has, one of those rare moments where they can go and check out a vendor or go here or get a card signed or, talk to somebody. But peel the curtain back a bit about what an entire day might look like, and how many hours you're at the venue and how many of those hours you are actually, knee deep in it.
I am working every single moment I'm at the venue. It's just like, whether it is actually on camera, which is probably the most demanding and draining part of the role, or it's off camera operating the card viewer, which is, requires a large amount of attention, but a fairly simple task to do. There's things like just walking the room, getting the story, understanding what's happening, speaking to players, so you can add some color, some insight to what's going on, their deck selections, things like that. Chronicling the whole draft. I mean, Brendan and I were out there. We picked a player, and both of our draft pods watch every single pick they made, so we can add that story to our coverage. And then there's just like show planning things, like setting up who's going to cover what rounds, what matches we're going to feature, what stories are we trying to tell throughout the broadcast, what does our timing look like? All of this is constant. It does not stop. And that is why when I finish these events, I'm exhausted, just completely and totally exhausted. It takes absolutely everything out of you, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It is the most fun you can possibly have, working as hard as you can possibly work.
Yeah, you're there for 3 consecutive 10+ hour days, and it's not like you're in an office where you can kind of zone out and drone on with certain things. You are constantly being the term that I like to use, which is I've heard in like a military documentary for fighter pilots, because that was once upon a time what I wanted to be, it's called helmet fire, where there's too many beeps and buzzes and clicks and inputs going into your brain that you need to manage to make sure that the plane is operating correctly. There's too many gauges and lights flickering, and eventually it becomes overwhelming where your brain is on fire and you cannot pick one thing to focus on because there's too much going on. That's kind of what you're trying to consistently manage. And what people don't understand is while we're casting, we also have our headsets and people feeding information to us in the headsets that we need to hear, understand, potentially respond to without skipping a beat of what we're talking about. If someone pops Stormstriders and there's a big turn coming up, I have to hear, what the judge calls about in my mind, because there's a slight delay, while explaining to you how the resources, what's being pitched, what's going on. This is all happening at the same time. And that kind of leads into the whole thing of, there's going to be mistakes and there's going to be errors and there's going to be things that we kind of blow past or forget about, because frankly, unless you've been there, you do not know what working through 30 consecutive, 3 days, 38 plus hours jammed in where you are under the microscope nonstop. And, what else is there that people do not know about besides the voice in your head or that in your earpiece? That kind of,
and the voice in my head, like those two together are just a huge problem.
Not to mention working with me is also a challenge. I'm fully aware, friends. The amount of times Brendan looked at me like, what the hell did you just say? was impressive. You play it off very well, but Brendan is the rookie here. And it was a definitely trial by fire experience for him. But what else is there that people might not know about that really adds layers of difficulty to the job?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough job. There's things just like being able to visually see the things you're trying to call. It is challenging sometimes with glare and camera angles, and the voice in the headset thing is, like I mentioned, I did a round with Mr. Classic. Kieran came into the booth and he had never done like kind of the producer in ear thing before. And I saw in his eyes the first time he was speaking while someone was speaking to him, just the collapse inwards of the brain. And it is challenging. And I've described it as like, I almost need to partition myself into two people, like a person who is speaking. And I just go, okay, crazy Bryan, you're in charge of that part while I listen and comprehend to what's going on. And then figuring out how I'm going to respond to that at the same time while speaking. It's a weird, bizarre juggling act that until you do it, you can't really be prepared for. But like I said, I really do love every second of it. It is my favorite thing to do. And I'm not looking for any sympathy, but it is it's a heck of a job. It's an interesting one, a weird one, and it's not one anyone can do for sure.
Yeah, seasoned casters, I find, and this is a skill that I've developed, is that once you've identified the play, you have it mapped out in your brain. Like Brendan will be explaining something as something's occurring. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to describe what's going on. This is what I want to say. And then as soon as it's my turn, like Brendan's completed his thought, it's on me. You flick on the autopilot and you just blast through it. And then all the stuff in your mind you could focus on because your mouth is essentially doing all the work now. That, like you said, you just split the brain in half. And it's definitely a skill because like you said, I remember the first time that I worked with somebody when someone buzzed in their ear while they were in mid sentence, and you could see, because it sounds like they went from perfectly sober to like 10 beers in. They just start slurring and slowing things down and trying to like really effort go through, and then they never heard what the hell was said. And I'm just like, I got you, we're good. But can confirm or deny, we are hired for our looks and our voice.
Confirm.
Confirm. Yes. No, that is
brains do not play into it.
No, we are we're terrible. Just want to make sure.
I don't know if I'm earning my money anymore. Maybe when I was a younger man, looks and voice were enough to carry me through. Nowadays, I feel like these companies are getting a raw deal. I should get Bryan from 10 years ago. He was actually a decent looking young man. Now I'm 40, grain. I'm eating everything in sight. I'm gaining weight. It's tough out there, man. Once you hit this age,
you earned it though. That's the beauty.
I feel like it.
Yeah. No, I'm all for it. Like once I was like, hey, I think I've solidified my legacy in this game, and I could potentially, I'm not out there constantly chasing. Like I think I've done a good thing. Time to eat myself fat and stupid. Like let's go for it. Yep. All right. Moving on with being able to work with the legend, Eric Lundqvist, aka Doa, somebody whom I knew nothing about prior to his kind of inclusion into our Discord about talking about Flesh and Blood. I can honestly say I was ignorant to the fact I never played League of Legends. I never followed competitive StarCraft. I was esports ignorant for so many years until Hearthstone, let's say. So I didn't know Doa. I worked with him. We talked, we hung out. Your experience working with the GOAT.
I mean, lived up to everything I would have expected from him. Just an incredible professional, incredible dude. Like, just had a great time hanging out with him, talking, going out to meals, after party, things like that, having some cocktails together. Just this wealth of knowledge about the industry, our job, really so many aspects of casting, be it the mental side or the business side. I'm just so appreciative of all the knowledge he brought to our team, and how willing he was to just, work with us. He didn't come in and try and take over the broadcast. It wasn't like it was working with a stranger. It was like one of us got added to the team and just felt like a natural inclusion. So happy that we got to do that together. And I hope we get to do more shows in the future.
I hope so too. The beautiful part about Doa was that he had time for everybody who came to speak to him. And again, he was the celebrity there.
By it too, Flake. Like when people came up and were like, "Oh, I watched you cast the StarCraft League back in the day," or "I remember this match you covered, League of Legends, one of my favorite." And he's just like, "I can't believe people want to talk to me about this." Like, yes, they want to talk to you about this. This was like a huge part of so many people's formative esports experience. And he's still very appreciative for all those folks who want to come and share those stories.
Of course, it's like meeting a musician. Like, yeah, you can talk about their new albums, but you also want to talk about the fact that, like, hey, I saw you at this dive bar, way back when, and you signed a T-shirt and before you were famous and had a record deal, kind of thing. Like that's part of it, and you do get humbled by that. People come up to me and they said, "Hey, I remember you from XYZ ages ago," and I was like, "Wow, that's really cool. I really appreciate that. Please focus on this because I was awful back then, but thank you." Doa, like you mentioned, the perennial professional every single time, was also lots of humility, because he was, like you said, he's the guy. He was there because he was essentially the most experienced and very knowledgeable of the cards, plays a ton, but also somebody who is like, hey, I'm the guest, I'm the rookie in this sort of arena. I don't need to do the finals. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do anything. This is your show. Like, use me where I'm best used, which is, again, a more testament to just the kind of teammate he was. And leading back to even ahead of us being signed for Worlds, he played a big role in ensuring that everybody was a team. And, we won't go into details or anything, but just to reiterate the fact that Doa's commitment to professionalism and to teamwork and camaraderie goes well beyond just when the cameras are on and we're calling matches. I can't speak enough high words about this person.
Seconded.
Dynasty is the basic flavor of the upcoming months here. you are on the design team, but you kind of came in, from what I understand, sort of midway through or in the early stages of Dynasty, where a lot of the framework was already there. You were kind of just, maybe flushing out some of the color palette for what some of the other stuff will be. But can you maybe just give us precisely what your influence on Dynasty is?
Sure. I worked a lot on Assassin. A lot. Basically, from day one of my time with LSS, my focus was on the Assassin class. It was sort of intended, I believe, that my role be more development-minded. And if you're not familiar with kind of how design versus development works in these spaces, it's often design sort of puts the initial idea out there. Development is, you make sure it's not broken, you make sure it is fun, you basically do all the testing work and get it to a place where, there's this rough idea, but you refine it into the beautiful, balanced final card that ultimately sees print. And I think that was the intended space, but pretty quickly we, I identified some pretty big problems with what we were working on and made a big shift. And when we made that shift, we're just like, hey, I don't know if this is what you intended me to do in my time. This was like basically a one-off 1-month contract that I signed. And I was like, I don't know if you intended me to do this, but here's kind of like my design thoughts and how I would fix this. And a lot of that ended up being used in the final product. And James and I very quickly realized that we saw design and the game of Flesh and Blood in very similar ways. Just kind of hit it off with our working relationship. And after my time on Dynasty was done, he came back to me and he said, what do you think about basically working on the design side of things full time? I really need someone on this side of things, because it is, certainly the dev team does a bunch of design as well. It is something that is very fluid. Design dev moves back and forth across our teams in a very healthy, very useful way, unlike some of the other games out there. But there's really only one person who is singularly focused on design, and that is James. And he was really looking for someone to come in and help him out with it. And I think our relationship has been awesome in the time that we've been collaborating together. We have something incredible for everyone coming down the pipeline. And I think particularly the Assassin class is a good representation of he and I collaborating on this stuff, finding the elements we liked together and really refining them into something special.
The Q&A at the pre-party, I just used some executive privilege there and asked you a question that I was very intrigued by, and the answer you gave me was very great. And I want to re-ask that question because I think people need to hear it. I'll frame it this way. What is the most Bryanized card, or the card that you're from Dynasty that you're just most proud of or has the best story in terms of its design?
Yeah, and as I said at that Q&A panel, I don't want to take any singular credit for any design. That's just not how our team works. We're collaborative. We stand on each other's shoulders. Nobody's looking to say, that's mine, I did this. It's about taking ideas from everywhere, combining them into something beautiful, and be that, development feedback or the loads of existing work that James has done previously, or, something from creative, where creative is saying, oh, this idea is really at its best when it's pointed in this way. All of those things combine to create any single card that goes out. So when I, point to something as the Bryanest thing, that's not me taking credit for it. I just want to be very clear about that. But I do recall, it's interesting too, because the version of Assassin is very different from what I was ultimately shown first. We changed basically everything about the hero, but there was a card, regicide, in the initial file, and it did something very different. And I remember looking at the card and it just not really hitting for me. Like, it was just kind of simple and didn't feel splashy, didn't feel exciting. So I messaged James and Chris, and I asked them if they were familiar with the TV show The Wire. And the reason I asked them that is because there's a character, if you've never seen The Wire, named Omar. And one of his most famous quotes is that, if you come at the king, you best not miss. Basically, I said it didn't make any sense that this regicide card was just like a card that got buffed attacking royals. I was like, this has to be everything.
Oh, sorry to interject. I wanted to say my initial, when you started this, because this is a more fleshed out answer than you gave there. And when you said that the card already existed, but it didn't quite do it for you, my first impression was that it was a card that was like, if this is attacking a royal hero, it gets +4 attack or something like that.
It was something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
It was something like that. Yep. And that just wasn't, that is not an assassination. That is not a regicide. Regicide, especially when you're dealing with it in the context of Arachne, of this attempted assassination, is years and years of preparation, gathering these smaller contracts, enriching yourself, building up this cache of weaponry that you have used over time, gathering information, banishing card after card after card, learning more about your opponent's weaknesses, about their strengths, and then after all of that, after all of this investment in time, you have one chance to try and take down the Emperor. One chance only. And it had to be reflected in a card that says, if you do this, you win. If you fail, you lose. Otherwise, the stakes just weren't appropriate for that card.
I think that's brilliant flavor. I believe the actor who played Omar has passed away.
He has, yeah. A tremendous actor.
I have not yet seen The Wire. It is something that I am going to do in the short term. And I know him as Chalky White from Boardwalk Empire. That's how I know.
Yeah. Yep.
But a tremendous talent, and again, somebody that that is unfortunately left us too soon, because he was an acting Goliath, an absolute legend. So we won't dive in too much. The set that is coming down the pipe, I don't want to get you in any trouble. Obviously, Dynasty hasn't even released yet, and if everybody's out there is already horny for the next set, cool your jets. We get acquainted with Dynasty beforehand. But is there anything about the next set that you can let us know about? It's a draftable set, and I know that this is something that you have had your fingerprints on from the get-go. And something you told me was that this is probably going to be the best draft experience in Flesh and Blood, and that's what I know about it.
I hope so. I really do. It's something we worked really hard on. And that's all I'm going to say at this time. Like you said, focuses on Dynasty. It is a draftable set, and I hope it is the best draftable set we've ever made. That is my sincere hope.
Perfect. I don't want to put your feet to the coals, so that's all you're going to say, and that's all I'm going to ask. Friends, that does it for our discussion, but we do have some questions from the community, Brian. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we can blast through these. Are you down for some go again?
Absolutely.
All right. We'll be right back with some Go Again with Bryan Gottlieb right after this message from BCW Supplies. Instant Speed is proudly supported by BCW Supplies. If you need protection for your cards, be it sleeves, deck boxes, storage, organizational tools, or hey, are you a comic book collector, a coin collector? BCW Supplies has your hookup. Use the code ISP10. Get 10% off all of your orders. Go to bcwsupplies.com. BCW, protect, store, display. All right, it's time to go again on Bryan Gottlieb. We're going to go wide with some questions here from the community. We had a lot of them, Brian. I think that in terms of guests on the show, James White obviously takes the cake when it comes to submitted questions, but you're not far behind. As soon as people got the sniff that you design cards, well, people had not only questions, but opinions too.
It has nothing to do with me. They just want information. That's all it is.
Oh, of course. Yeah. They want to Sherlock their way into relevancy by trying to peel some, the best, by the way, are when like somebody says something in passing and then there's a YouTube video breaking it down and trying to figure, I'm guilty of this too. I'm absolutely guilty of this. When you're starved for content and you're like, what is there going to be not even who is the fourth hero in Uprising? It's what is there going to be? Let's go through all the shitty clues that don't mean anything.
This is what I fear more than anything, and it's part of the reason why I always make clear that I am a contractor, not an employee of LSS, because I feel like that gets me the out where the things I said they're not binding. They're not going to actually 100% of the time come to fruition. You don't have to use my words to try and put together clues. They're just not there. I'm just some guy saying stuff. Don't worry about it that much. And if I say something wrong, I retain that express privilege to do so.
Yeah, as a fellow contractor in different capacities, obviously, I just abuse the shit out of it. I'm like, sometimes I'll just reply to it. Like someone will send me a question, I'll reply to them from the my LSS email, just to make it even more poignant. No, I don't do that. No,
that's smart.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, hold on a second, let me reply from this. Bam, and then I just absolute 100% false information just to feed the fire. Okay. First question, Mr. Bryan Gottlieb from Para9 asking, when did you start working as a designer for LSS and how did that come to pass? What is your design resume?
That's an interesting question. So I had done some design contracting on Magic the Gathering previously. I think so much of my design background just comes from studying games, thinking about games, and having written about games for I don't know how long I was a writer at Star City, but in some sense, I had been writing about Magic since 2009. And when you write about a game for 12, 13 years, you uncover a lot of truths about the design elements, and you start to express your vision of design. And I think that's what made me an attractive hire to LSS. But essentially, the process for me ending up with this first, as I mentioned, 1 month gig on Dynasty was I lost my writing gig. Star City sort of canned us all at the same time as they shifted away from Magic content. And I had lost my broadcasting gig with Magic. And I just sort of tweeted out, hey, anyone looking for someone in the gaming space? And James White messaged me and he says, what do you think about moving to New Zealand? And I was like, well, maybe. Like I never say no to anything.
Do they have log cabins there for you to live in?
Yeah, I don't know. Do they have rich mahogany everywhere? But no, essentially, I'm like, well, I'm open to at least have a conversation. And then we had that conversation. And again, I guess James is my boss, but I also think he's my friend. We have so much in common. Such a good dude. We genuinely enjoy the time we spend together. And I think that was developing from the first time we spoke. And yeah, just a very fruitful relationship blossomed from that. And as I mentioned, I did the Dynasty gig. I ended up working a lot on the design side, somewhat, I think, unexpectedly, of the Assassin class. And everything just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, James is an incredible person to work with or for, or whatever capacity you want to label it. Ultimately, that came to, that sort of was hammered down in New Jersey, where I had been asking him, I asked him on day one if he would sign a card and a mat for me, and I didn't ask him for the rest of the trip because he was absolutely just hammered down busy. And on the last day, I had just given up. I'm like, I'll see him down the line. And he bumped into me walking into the hotel, and he points at me. He's like, Flake, or Matt. He calls me Matt. He's like, Matt. He's like, I ain't signing another goddamn thing today until I sign that card you wanted signed. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I'm like, I'll come bring it down. He's like, no. He's like, yeah, it's in your hotel room. I'll come hang out with you. So we were in the hotel room for a solid 10, 15 minutes. He was signing a few things. But beyond that, he was like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? And I told him a little bit about, the struggles of content creation and that whole place. And he asked me about my health history when I was in the hospital for that long period of time. And he was more concerned about my well-being as a person than he was about my place necessarily in Flesh and Blood. He wanted to make sure that was squared away and supported before he reassured me that, I'm doing a good thing for the game, and he appreciates it, and he wanted to make sure that we're taken care of. James is just an awesome dude through and through.
Yep, that has been a constant in my dealings with James. Always, the person before anything else is what he's interested in, and that's, I always hesitate to talk about this. I have gotten myself to a very fortunate place in my life where I don't really have to work if I don't want to, and I'm very blessed to be in that spot. A lot of things broke well for me, and I never take it for granted. And I don't say that as a boastful thing, but it informs my decisions in everything I do. And it's about when I had the opportunity to work on this game, I didn't need to do it. I wanted to do it. And so much of that comes from the way this company treats people and employees and the game and just everything. And that tone will always come from the top. And I think you see the generosity and good nature of James echo throughout LSS's dealings, and that goes right down to player communication. All that stuff comes from just genuine interest in giving people good experiences. And I would never ever have sort of hitched my wagon to the Flesh and Blood train without that kind of assurance that they are indeed that type of group.
Worth noting as well is that the next generation of the White family are also amazing. I met his daughter Monica on the last day because they were going to Disney World that night. What people don't realize is that James had his military escort helicopter ready to bring him to I guess SFO, to fly them out to LA to go to Disney or Anaheim, or I don't know where Disney World is ultimately. But I met her, Monica White, his daughter, and she is such a lovely young lady who I was like, I said, hi, my name is Matt. It's nice to meet you. And she's like, likewise, how was your day? I was like, dear, I just spent 3 days dumbing down my conversation so Tannen would understand me. And here's an actual adult in like a 9-year-old's body or however old she was. And, I was so thrilled because my number one memento from that entire trip, besides memories, besides the one thing that I will cherish the most, is my flake out signed by Monica White with, you could see it like right here. It's the Mickey Mouse little silhouette because she was so excited to go to Disney World. So I signed a flake out for her saying to my new friend, enjoy Disney World. And she signed this for me. And that is by far the best thing that I got. And she was just the sweetest young lady and the nicest, most, intelligent, smart young lady that I think I've ever met. And that's probably James, who's like, yeah, this company's going to be yours soon. So you better start shaking hands now. Just an awesome person.
I mean, she's an incredible person. She really is. And just incredibly talented, incredibly sweet and generous, and just an awesome young lady.
All right, this one coming from Hayden Dale, who is exceptional at Flesh and Blood and complete ass at Mario Kart. Sorry, I have to pronounce this correctly.
Mario. He even had a strategy session with us ahead of his kart racing. He wanted to know, when is the best time to drink my beer? Because I believe the rules where you can only advance while you were not drinking a beer, right? But you have to finish your beer to actually have finished the race.
Yes, that is correct. Because he said
so he called us over for a whole strategy session and then just absolutely bombs.
Oh, completely. I was there with him watching this, and he's like, Flake, should I just scull the beer and then go just finish it? I said, yeah. I'm like, I think the best option here is unless you anticipate constantly getting knocked around and staying stationary, you should probably just absolutely just crush that beer and then go. And that's what he did. It went, red, yellow, green. Everyone takes off and he just chugs it and then absolutely got dummied by everyone else. And then he looks at me with the funniest thing. He's like, apparently the drinking wasn't the issue. The driving was always going to be the problem. I was like, yes, that seems to be correct.
Makes sense.
Great guy. Awesome. We had dinner together and the rule was no talking about cards. And we discovered that if we lived within 100-mile radius, we would probably just gravitate and become roommates because he's so funny. He also,
not sure how his soon-to-be wife would feel about that. You might want to check with her first.
No, Devin, I've met her. She's also amazing. However, one of the first things I said to Hayden when I met him was like, you're really sturdy. He's a, and then when I met Devin, he's like, oh, this is my friend Flake. It's, he's one of the broadcasters. I said, oh, it's a pleasure to meet you. Congratulations on your engagement. Hayden is a very sturdy partner. It's like, all right, let's double down on being a complete idiot. But he does have a question. Besides chirping me for my Canadian pronunciation of Mario instead of Mario, he just kept saying Mario. I was like, I got it.
I think I say Mario too.
Yeah, there you go. Suck on it, Hayden, you clown. Does Bryan think pre-world bans ended up having the desired and right impacts on the world's meta and shaped a successful event? It's a very good question.
It is. It is an excellent question. In CC, yes. I think just ginned it, home run, one of the best CC formats we've ever had. Icelander looks like the best deck when it's played by Michael Hamilton. As I mentioned, you go to the calling, tells you a very different tale. I wonder how things would have shook out if we played 16 rounds of Classic Constructed. I mean, Michael Hamilton still wins. Obviously, that's just, how it goes.
Yeah.
But the other metagame around that could certainly look very different. So really like that Oldhim minute nerf going into the event. I think it got us to exactly the format we wanted for Worlds. And I'm so, so happy with the work we did there, balancing out that format. Blitz, I don't know. I think we got about 85% of the way there. I think we've done a good job slowing down the format. I do think maybe we took the wrong approach when it came to bringing Icelander back to the field, and Brandon Patrick's going to be thrilled to hear that. It's so weird because there's no argument to make that banning Stormstriders didn't make the deck worse. It obviously did. But the problems with Icelander and Blitz are a little bit more fundamental than something like Stormstriders. And while there were Kanos in the Blitz event, I do think maybe we've done too much to limit his viability in the format. So we have to think about that. We have to think about what we want Blitz to be in the future. And like I said, I think we ended up in a good place for this tournament. For Blitz to be at Worlds, we did a nice job showing it off. But we do want all of our heroes to be viable, to have their signature playstyle, especially when it comes to your armory experience, right? We want everyone to go out to an armory and be able to play the heroes they want to play. And, that extends to the Emperor as well. I mean, I see a lot of people talk about the Emperor as a meme in line with Shiana. I don't think that's the case. I think the Emperor is a real hero in Blitz, and people are going to be surprised by that. But he sort of needs a full kit. So I want to think carefully about Stormstriders in the coming months, in the coming years. We'll figure out where we land on that card. On the whole, though, I do think we ended up in a good place for Blitz, and the feedback was very positive. I'm grateful for that.
The Pulse of Eisenleft ban had a lot of Autumn's Touch vibes to it, where it was kind of like, oh, okay, that seems insignificant, but ultimately, it doesn't. It doesn't always have to be a 1 or a 10. Like you can dial it to a 3, and that's the right frequency, right? So, Kale McCreath asks, you mentioned on stream about your dislikes of the design of Remembrance. Can you elaborate as to why?
I think Remembrance subs in for a lot of end games where maybe we would have to look for more creative approaches in the absence of it. And it shapes a lot of what you can do with design space. Like, there are some cards that if they're played 6 times throughout the course of the game is simply about that card. And I do think Remembrance eats up some design space. It tends to lead to very... and this is in very specific situations. Obviously, Remembrance is not dominating any format right now. You don't see it all over the place. Occasionally you see one, but even that has mostly fallen out of favor as compared to, going back to the Welcome to Wraith days. But should Remembrance matter again, I think it will often lead to very rehearsed end game states, very similar finishes to games. And I just think game could be better off without it. I don't think it's a problem. I don't think it'll ever I should never say never. I don't think it's headed to the banned and suspended list anytime soon. It's just one of those cards that's kind of awkward, and I think the game would be better off if it didn't exist.
MNR Cast, I think is this the Michael Hamilton podcast? I believe it is. I
believe so, yes.
Damn right. Well, look at us. Getting some love from the world champ himself. Thank you very much for submitting the questions, everybody, frankly. Asking, when are we getting legendary generic arms and boots? This falls under the you can't say, so create a very, satisfying answer.
Do you want to guess my answer to this, Flake?
Well, okay. Can I just answer for you?
Sure.
We'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
Or you could do soon if you want.
Soon.
I mean, soon doesn't mean anything. So.
Soon, absolutely. Within the grand scheme of the world. Soon. I will use the same logic that was thrown at me when someone tried to convince me that that nobody plays Flesh and Blood, and my response was, well, there was like over the course of 3 days, there was almost 4,000 people who attended Pro Tour New Jersey. And the reply I got was, well, there's 8 billion people in the world, so really that's insignificant. So
yeah, you're right. I can't argue with that.
On the grand timeline of existence, both infinite backwards and forwards, frankly, soon could be, even if it's 1,000 years, that's a blink of an eye, friends, you know? So
Agreed.
We'll say soon, because that's a nice little broad brush to paint this picture with. From at S. John C., S. John Chambers asks, sorry if I'm pronouncing, if it's John, I apologize. Never heard this name. This falls under the whole thing. Yeah. Also, my apologies to Rob Catton, or Cat On, because I was getting tweets to both sides of the field. So to everybody who helped me pronounce the name incorrectly and correctly, your services are not needed, but I appreciate your concern.
I struggle with Rob's name, and it's like such a straightforward name, but I wanted to make the A kind of soft and say like cotton almost, and then sometimes I would say Catan, and it was just a disaster for what seemed to be a very simple name.
Well, I started with Catton, which I thought was the correct way to go.
What I eventually moved to was Catton.
I started with Catton, and then I got a tweet saying that I was absolutely incorrect, that it's Cat On, and so I pivoted to that, and then I got further tweets saying it's Catton. And then I tagged in the other person, and I said, you guys figure it out. I said,
back to me.
And I also sent them the list of all the other names from 21st to 40, where there's like names that have like symbols from the periodic table of elements in them, and there's like a name with an A and an E humping each other and stuff like that. And I was like, you guys can also help me with this, and we will get back to it. I have things to do, but my apologies to Rob Catton, because one of the most basic things that you can do is pronounce, in terms of showing respect, is pronouncing their names correctly. And I tried my best, and I apologize if I offended anyone. Nonetheless, not an easy job. This goes back to the other conversation we had about difficulties and challenges casting. So Jean, Mr. Chambers, we'll say. Here's Mr. Chambers' question. It was really cool to hear how the recurring assassin gear almost had temper instead, but that it tested too strongly. What are some other examples of cards that could have been? I love this conversation, and it could just be ideas. You don't have to go into specifics, but what are some that just didn't make it past that initial design phase?
Yeah, I shared this story. I don't know if it was on the broadcast or at the Q&A panel, but I believe I misspoke. It would have had blade break, not temper in that scenario. I think, functionally the same thing, just it, only had the 1 point of defense, and it was too good. It was too easy to manipulate and move it in and out of your graveyard to recur with silver. So one of the things, I'm not going to answer this question, but I'm going to tell you why I'm not going to answer this question.
Sure.
So hopefully it doesn't frustrate you.
Is it because some of these are still being refined?
Yes. There's a lot of stuff that just because it doesn't work, like we go through so much material before it's actually boiled down to the final set that you get to play with. And so much of this, it's not gone forever. It's gone for right now. And we may revisit the idea. We may want to do something slightly different, or it may just be we chose not to do it in this fashion because it wasn't the right time for it, and we want to do it down the road. So I don't think there is anything that ultimately we could have done and didn't do that is just gone forever that immediately springs to mind. If there was a change similar to this blade break discussion that I could share with you, I would, but nothing like that immediately pops to mind. And all the other stuff we've kind of cast off, it's just cast off for now. It may come back in the future.
Yeah, that's the beautiful part about it, is that ideas might not be correct or fitting right now. It doesn't mean that they're bad ideas. So a lot of stuff just needs the right climate to bloom. This one coming from Gabe Scher, who was a fellow Canadian until he currently is he's living in the Netherlands, trying to pump up the scene over there. Great player as well. Asking, boiling down this question to digestible little nuggets here asking, do you think that players have reached a good idea what optimality is in Flesh and Blood in terms of both deck building and gameplay? If not, is there something you think players are missing? And this was off the back of him kind of also, kind of breaking down what would be potentially a quote unquote formula for what a card would be in terms of, attack, pitch, this, that, whatever. In terms of optimally creating a deck, are there certain pillars players need to build upon, a foundation, and is there anything that you think players might have sort of overlooked or are currently not respecting?
I think players are getting better all the time in Flesh and Blood, dramatically so, quite frankly. Is there anything that they are just oblivious? Even if the answer to this was yes, like I'm not going to take away the joy of discovery. Things like Michael Hamilton showing up to the U.S. Nationals with Wounded Bull in his deck. Like, Wounded Bull was a respected card within development. I think there are many devs who would say it's a very real card, a very worthwhile card to be playing. If I just came out the last time I was on your podcast and was like, everyone should be playing Wounded Bull, I'm kind of like stealing that moment from the collective. Like, you should go out and explore. But to the question, like, do I think we've reached a point of optimality? No, definitely not.
That's good
Definitely
news
not.
for those who are the worst thing that can happen is when people just say, look, well, it's all been figured out. Well, it doesn't seem to be that way. I mean, people were fishing out Wounded Bulls from under their coffee tables, that were
just like what we see tournament to tournament. There's so much evolution of the game, and approaches get better and better, game planning gets better and better. Even just like play of the game, things like sink below locking someone on turn 2 of the top 8 of World Championships, like. That is now something that the collective will consider from this point forward. And I guarantee if you walk around every single Arsenal event that goes on in America, there's going to be a lot fewer sink belows put into Arsenal in the Icelander mirror on average over the next few weeks.
What a brilliant play. What an absolute brilliant play. I got to ask Michael Hamilton about that afterwards, and I said, listen, it was prior to the interview, and I was like, if you want to comment on it, I was just going to ask you about what your thoughts were when you realized that it was sink below that he was putting in Arsenal. And he's like, to his credit, again, the world's best player at Flesh and Blood, and he looks at me and he's like, I mean, I thought I'd just win there, but again, I've never really been in that scenario before, so I wasn't sure. And Michael Hamilton probably doesn't go ahead and play against a bunch of random scrubs very often. He's probably testing with the best who probably don't make that mistake. And, credit to the other Icelander player for putting up a good fight, but that was a mistake that was dropped. I say a mistake. It was a decision that was made that Michael Hamilton identified as being exceptionally exploitable and went to town on it. And you could see his reaction when it occurred, where he's like, I just turned this into a 90-10 matchup because my opponent no longer is playing at half speed that I am. Like, you can't play on my turn anymore, and that is brilliant. Brilliant.
What's fascinating about that, though, Flake, is I spoke a lot with very good Flesh and Blood players after that top 8, and there is a world where it could actually be a count. If you can predict that your opponent is going to play in the fashion that Michael Hamilton played and never attack again, you could actually set that up as a counter bait. Get your opponent to ignore that portion of their game, set up your end game faster, and potentially win from the spot of having baited them into not attacking you all game, which just shows how deep this Flesh and Blood rabbit hole goes. And can you imagine, I mean, obviously this was not the case, but can you imagine if that was just like the strat that was executed there? Like, bait Michael Hamilton into never attacking you again, and then actually now if I get him to do this and then I play this matchup in a different fashion, he can't win, and I've flipped it to 90-10 in my favor. So fascinating. And just like, maybe a game that in terms of moment to moment back and forth didn't have a lot of what many of the other games in the top 8 did, but in terms of showing the potential of Flesh and Blood, the depth of Flesh and Blood, and how good and how smart these players are, I think it was an awesome game to have as part of our top 8.
It's kind of like tossing your queen out to the middle of the board to get gobbled up just to throw your opponent off. You're like, yeah, whoopsie daisies. Meanwhile, it was all part of the plan. That would have been incredibly brilliant. Again, like you said, the layers upon layers that you can continue to peel back is gorgeous. This one coming from Rich, aka the Polish guy on my Discord. Really great dude. I met him in Columbus. Just a generous and genuine soul. Great person. Asking, what drew you into Flesh and Blood once you discovered it? Also, being a designer, do you have a baseline for evaluating the power of new cards? I'm wondering what that magnifying glass is that when you have a design, you put it under, and what are you kind of inspecting in that case?
What drew me to Flesh and Blood was the sense of identity and the realization that whatever story I want to tell with these cards, I can tell it. There are mechanics in place that no matter what you say, I can design something that is a mechanical reflection of that idea, and the resonance is there. Like something, we can go back to Regicide and talk about how well that card portrays the idea of the entire assassination attempt that was so pivotal to the story. It was just shining through on that card. And I truly believe almost anything you want to express in Flesh and Blood, you can do so due to the mechanics. As far as any magic sauce I use to evaluate a card, nope. There's nothing like that. It's a lot of instinct, a lot of gaming experience. We all know the baseline formula, right? We all know 0 cost attacks will deal 4 damage, 1 cost attacks will deal 5, 2 will deal 6, 3 will deal 7. There's nothing hidden or obscured there. So if you're breaking from that trend, then certainly you pay more attention to that. You ask why you're breaking from that trend. Can you break from that trend? Doesn't happen all that often. And whenever it does, you have to watch carefully and think about what you're doing. But that's it. I mean, beyond that, it's just thinking about creating great play experiences and interesting answers and interesting threats. And how do you make the game of Flesh and Blood as interactive and special as we know it can be?
So this whole investigative kind of Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs. You're old enough for Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs, right? Like, there's.
I know who those humans are. I don't know that I ever watched anything from Barbara Walters or Hugh Downs.
Yeah, this is like the 2020 crew of a long time ago. Well, do you know John? Maybe I'll say John Stossel. Man, I'm old, dude. Like,
nope, I'm older than you, and I don't know that one, Flake. So.
Okay. Either way, they were like ABC or whatever the network was that carried 2020. Like it was on like Friday nights, like that investigative journalism.
Flake, hold on, I'm gonna break this for you. So this is why I don't know. My house, growing up, I lived in the woods on top of a mountain. I had only those little rabbit ears coming off my TV to be able to get in outside channels. The channel, which was ABC, channel 10, I believe, in my hometown, did not come in through my rabbit ears. Could not see it. So it being on ABC is probably why I have never really seen it before.
That'll definitely do it. Well, what I was getting at is like this investigative journalism reports that there was a video that was posted recently about the magic secret formula has been cracked. The equation that LSS uses to design all their cards has been discovered. It has been put through a lab. A team of scientists have essentially discovered the holy grail, the God equation of card design. Is there any truth to it that you guys just basically...
Hey, can they share it with me? Because that would make my job a lot easier. I would love to see this equation.
Okay, it's like we have game
just
text.
Plug things into a formula. That sounds great.
Yeah, I was just curious. Again, like there's obviously going to, like you said, 4 for 0 is essentially baseline. That's how you build from there. But I don't think that there's... if you build from there, obviously a lot of the cards are going to fit that bill to a degree, but I don't think that there's an actual formula that they, it's like, all right, we have 7 variables, punch in this number and these numbers, and the rest will solve itself. I don't think that's true. Last question for you, Bryan, and I do appreciate your time. We got a ton of questions, and for all those who asked questions, if I'm not asking that question to Bryan, because Bryan said he'll answer most of it, the ones that I don't ask are because he has told me, he's like, I can't answer that question because of, non-disclosure stuff, and I'm not going to even ask it because to hear him say no comment, no comment, no comment is not very appealing. Unless I say, who is the best Flesh and Blood caster, Bryan?
Comment.
There you go. See, that's what you get, and that's not good TV. Last one from Tom of Harvest, cool name, at Doubling Season says, what percentage of cards designed by you make it through to the final product? How hard is it to push an idea through? I've always been fascinated about this, that if, like, say, 100-card set gets pushed out for Dynasty, this is obviously not true, but that's what I'm saying here. How many cards are actually tabled?
Like 95% of them are tabled. So, 20 designs for every one card that gets made. I mean, that's just a guess. I don't know that that's actually right, but we make a lot of cards. We have a lot of ideas, and we're aggressive with sort of throwing stuff out. I mean, we have a very high quality expectation. We want to deliver exciting cards, meaningful cards. There's a lot less chaff in our game than a lot of other games. It is. And it's hard. It's hard to deliver on that kind of expectation over and over and over again. And I think, like I said, we're very willing to throw out ideas. We're very, very willing to table ideas. All of these, if I say I design 20 cards and one makes it through, those other 19 are out there somewhere, and maybe I'll revisit them at some point. They're all well sorted, well kept, and maybe they'll be right for another day, or maybe they're just bad, and that's part of the process. Some things don't work. Some things are not interesting. Some things are fundamentally broken. All of those things happen with regularity. And our job is to really find the best stuff, the most interesting stuff, the stuff that makes us excited to play this game that we all love. And it's not easy. It requires a lot of trial and error, but it's a lot of fun. I'll say that.
I feel like these supplemental sets, particularly Dynasty, will have cards that may have been destined for previous sets that either didn't have space. I mean, there's only so many Majestics you can print in a particular set. Can you let us know if there was a card in Dynasty that maybe was like a pushover from Monarch, let's say, or a pushover from a previous set?
All I'll say on that is that James as well runs deep. He's got a lot of ideas that have not yet seen the light of day. A lot of them, which he just says. I mean, in the same way, I've only been doing this for, I think, 7 months. And if I were to go through my design bank, there's thousands of things there. James has done this for, what?
10 years,
9 years?
I think. Yeah,
10 years? Yeah. His bank is just deep, and there are many, many ideas there. Some of the things that do eventually make it to sets, they come from the past. Yeah, they come from either past explorations or sometimes size, absolutely an issue. We only have so much we can fit into every set. All of those things will sometimes force things into a set. So that's kind of, a little bit of vagary, but the answer is ultimately yes. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just waiting for the moment or refining. Sometimes it just takes that one tweak to make the card special. And again, we can go back to regicide, where if we hadn't found that tweak, maybe that card gets cut and we do it down the line at some point. Although I think there's always going to be something to make sure we killed that no good dastardly emperor in this set, since the story was so built around it. How about that reveal season, Flake? I was so impressed, and that is completely outside my hands. This isn't me tooting my own horn at all. What a setup to just go ahead and make the entire preview season about Emperor's weapons, Emperor's armory, Emperor's dead. Yeah. I thought that was so freaking cool.
It reminds me of that like South Park thing where they're trying to register a domain, and every idea they have, it's like, and it's gone. Yep. It's like constantly. The reveal season, big, props to Chris Bewley of LSS, who reaches out to the content creators, gives them their assets and discusses it. And he put a lot of effort into making it so hype. The letter I got was from the Emperor, handwritten to me, to bless me with this wonderful, mechanologist weapon that looked really rad and everything. And, I was like, yeah, this seems so damn cool. And he's dead. It's like, oh, okay.
He's dead.
That's it.
I mean, that moment where like the trailer cuts, the Emperor is dead. I thought it was so good. And then to go with DM Armada's reveal of Arachne, I don't know. It really felt like a high water mark as far as preview seasons have gone. It just felt like it delivered over and over again.
And I would be remiss if I did not give a lot of love again to Doa and his reveal, which funny story about that reveal. That reveal was the contingency plan to the original idea, where the person that he was supposed to be doing the video with unfortunately wasn't available at the last second. So Doa's like, I guess I'll just slap this together, which turned out to be one of the most hilarious things I had seen in a long time. Because if you know Doa is one of those super well-polished, refined individuals, a true pillar of the casting Mount Rushmore, one of the heads there. And then there he was just being a complete goof.
Slamming katsu protein powder and having a great time.
If you haven't seen it, friends, please go take a look at it and tell me just how hilarious that combat chain was that he put together, because it was so good. Bryan, again, thank you so much for putting me second place next to a toilet. There's a story behind that, but ultimately I know my place, and you found time for me. And
have you tried living without a toilet, Flake? It is not an easy life.
No, that happened once, where I went to, every year we'd go to my buddy's cottage on a lake, just like a bunch of us in our 20s, for a few days. And the first day we got there, there was a humongous storm that pushed trees over.
I thought you were going to say something else, but continue. Yeah.
Anyways, the plumbing went out because like the water pump was electric. So it was like, y'all got one flush. Like there's one flush and then it's over. So we were all basically a bunch of cavemen in the woods rubbing two sticks together and using leaves as Charmin. I have lived without a toilet. I will never, ever again live without a toilet. And frankly, when it comes down to figuring out which hotel I'm going to stay at for a convention, frankly, proximity to the event, to the actual venue, and easy access to a private toilet is like, I don't like, oh my God. If you can just say like, hey, there's like a Icelander mirror coming up, you're not on this round. You've got about 45 to 50 minutes. Like, go do whatever. It's like, oh, this is it for me. This is celebrity. That's the kind of celebrity I want, is my own bathroom. 100%.
The greatest casters venue of all time, where I'm actually headed this weekend, I believe, to check out. Can't play anymore, but I really want to go see the Battle Hardened that's going on this weekend in Philadelphia. But it's in the Valley Forge Casino. And the Valley Forge Casino,
I've been there.
Amongst Magic players, have reached this kind of mythical status because it was so widely used by the SCG Tour. It's quirky is probably the best way to describe it. But I will tell you what is the greatest part of the Valley Forge Casino as a caster. You leave your hotel room, you push the button to your elevator, you step into the elevator goes down into the convention center. So you don't even leave the building. It's just elevator down, convention center, and you're right there. It opens right to the floor. It is the most convenient possible thing you can do in terms of just being able to go up to your room, relax for a moment between rounds, do what other business you may have to do while you're present in that room. It was one of the most favored spots from the SCG Tour casters, except for that trip from the airport, which was often quite long. But you got to gamble before you went to bed at night. I mean, yeah, it was just a win-win.
There are multiple other stories. We're not going to get into them because, this is definitely for those people to talk about. But long story short, one of those nights was myself, Tommy Fresh, and Nick Bolas. And Nick Bolas, unfortunately, got kicked out of the table for massive party fouls, winning and losing at the table, but ultimately he was escorted away from the gambling.
That'll happen.
Yeah,
that'll happen. Yeah. So the Valley Forge Casino, when Magic started to kind of crumble a little bit with its organized play offerings, there was sort of this swell of emotion around supporting the Valley Forge Casino, and then basically, if you've seen the Bender meme, where he goes, well, we'll make our own whatever it is.
With blackjack and
hookers. That was essentially the Valley Forge Casino. We'll make our own Pro Tour, but with blackjack at the Valley Forge Casino. And that Pro Tour hasn't taken off yet. But if it did, I'd be down to cast it.
Well, if there's hookers, I mean, it depends on how you do at the blackjack table. So right. Bryan Gottlieb, designer, caster extraordinaire, and friend of mine. And that's what's most important to me. So thank you so much for being on the show, buddy.
Our pleasure as always.
All right, where can we get more Bryan Gottlieb? Because you got tagged into some critiques that weren't actually you, which was great. So
that is true.
poor at Bryan Gottlieb, who got told what's up.
I don't know who that is, but I do feel bad for them. My Twitter handle is at BRYNGO. If you'd like to critique me, that is probably where you should do it. Of course, have my podcast, the Arena Decklist Podcast. You will be getting Dynasty into your hands any day now, maybe even as this is released. We're looking at the Dynasty release, and I would love to hear what you think of it. I'm really proud of my work on the Assassin class. I'm really thankful that I got to be a part of it, and I'm really excited for the future of Flesh and Blood too.
Well, thank you again to our sponsors, FAB Cards. Job from FAB Cards actually found me at the event and gave me a FAB Cards hat, which is now my favorite hat. He knew exactly what I wanted, a 3930 style New Era caps, and with just the logo, and he hooked it up, and I am forever grateful. Also, thanks to BCW Supplies for always giving me stocked with binders and hard cases and sleeves galore. You guys rock as well. And to all our patrons for just keeping the lights on here and supporting me. I met many of you this past weekend, and I hope to meet more of you as the road goes. So thanks so much for listening to the Instant Speed Podcast. Don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning, so keep playing the game. You might win. We'll catch you next time on ISP.